Hi, everybody. RivkaLeah here for another episode of our From Darkness to Radiance podcast. I want to remind everybody that I am not a doctor or a therapist. I speak from my own experiences or from experiences of trusted friends. And I am very pleased to say that I have a wonderful guest with me today. So I would love to introduce you to AJ. Hello, AJ. Thank you for being here with me.
Hello, I'm happy to be here and talk to everybody today.
This is fabulous. Now, I was introduced to AJ through a mutual friend, and I just felt that it would be wonderful to talk and hear your experiences and kind of your input on things that have been going on. So, I know we've chatted a little bit before, but can you kind of briefly tell me what your personal experiences with trauma are and how it's affected your life?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'm going to give the disclaimer that I am not a psychologist um, or have a doctorate. I am designated as a mental health practitioner here in Illinois, and I do crisis counseling work. So, both my personal and professional experience are probably going to come into play throughout this podcast.
Great.
Um, Personally, my trauma history, I lost my mom at age 17. She fought cancer for 13 years off and on. There were periods of remission. There were good times, there were not so good times, but definitely traumatic times when you experience that from. So I was about age 3 when she was diagnosed, right after my brother was born. There's a 3-year age difference between him and I. And she was diagnosed with breast cancer and she fought it for 13 years. And at the time, it's kind of unheard of to fight it that long. This was in the 80s and 90s. She passed away in 1995 when I was a senior in high school. Actually, went into the hospital like 2 days before my graduation. So that definitely adds another layer to the trauma as far as
Yeah.
timing. My brother and I were both set to graduate, him from 8th grade and me from high school. My mom was super excited to go to both of our graduations, had her outfit planned, and her health just kind of took an unexpected turn.
Oh my gosh.
Right before then, I happened to be at home because they give seniors usually like the day off before graduation. So I was at home, my dad was at work, my brother was off doing something. And when I went upstairs to just check in and see what was going on, my mom wasn't breathing that well. And I hadn't seen her experience that before, so I knew something was wrong.
Right.
She tried to like console me and not, not have me freak out because here's a 17-year-old not knowing what to do with their mother being in some kind of medical crisis. So she had me give her some of her morphine pills that she had prescribed so that at least help the situation a little bit. And then I was able to contact my dad, and he came home and took over from there. She was admitted to the hospital. My grandparents were set to come out for my brother's graduation that night. And life just kind of carried on that way, like as normal as it could, even though inside I felt like nothing was normal in that moment. My
Oh,
world was kind of like turned upside down. I did not even want to go to my graduation. I went. I did not want to be there, knowing that my mom was in the hospital and not knowing what was going on. I did get to go to the hospital and see her, and that was also kind of a traumatic experience. When I was there, she was on a breathing tube that she was choking on a little bit. So I did at least get to tell her that I loved her and see her. We were told that she had a blood clot in her lung, and normally they could give medication that would help that. But unfortunately, they said it would make some of the tumors that she had in her body at the time bleed, and so they
right.
couldn't do that. So eventually, her heart wore out trying to compensate for her breathing, and she passed on Memorial Day in 1995. So that
Goodness.
date is always a reminder for me, of course, as
I'm
well
sure.
as the graduation. So that's not where my trauma history began. It probably began when I was 3 and having to, like, live life with a parent who is terminally ill.
Right.
Um,
But
so
like
as
you said, in that time frame, you had some amazing years with her because medicine wasn't what it is today.
Right.
So I'm glad to hear at least you had that time with her. But yeah, it sounds like your trauma
Yeah,
started very, very
that is
early.
it did start early, and I think, when it does start early like that, as you may know, as because 'cause we're both adults, like, there's things that don't show up till later in life because as a
Exactly.
kid, you can't really process what's happening. Your
Right.
brain is literally still growing and not functioning at, like, the adult level of processing like we should be able to do.
Right.
So as a kid, I had a lot of anxiety that I didn't know was anxiety because you didn't know how to name it. I probably
Right.
had PTSD, but, like, you don't know how to name that as a kid as well. And definitely my lens is like you said, like, I had a lot of great years with her. We lived as normally as we could within the diagnosis of having a terminally ill parent. My dad was supportive, my grandparents were supported. I did have a loving family and a lot of things that other people don't have, but it's still traumatic. And
Exactly.
it still shows up in different ways in relationships in adulthood. Um, and it's also part of why I do the work that I do, the crisis work, because I mostly see kids as young as I've seen kids as young as 6, and my oldest client currently that's an outpatient client is 50, but the majority is between, like, 6 and 20.
And do you think having experienced trauma from a very young age, and as you said, you didn't have the knowledge to name it at that point, so it probably followed through up into your adult years and you didn't know why you were doing some of the things that you were doing or making the decisions that you were making. But do you think that all of that has influenced um, your being able to help the people that you help now?
Yeah, I definitely think it has influenced me. It honestly took a long time to, like, actually get to know myself and understand how to process, name, and feel emotions because I did not do a lot of that as a kid. I, by not any fault of my parents, was on my own a lot. I would introvert, and I'm an introvert now, but, like, I would introvert. My outlet was playing sports when I was a kid and through high school, and I think honestly that's probably one of the things that kept me going. But when I was at home, I would be in my room, I would be watching TV, I would be reading. Um, and as you and I probably both know, our parents' generation are not the most emotionally vulnerable.
No, they're not.
And it's not any blame or any fault of their own, it trickles down from previous generations, but, like,
Exactly.
we didn't learn how to name emotions and express emotions, so that's very much something I had to learn to do as adulthood through my own therapy, and in turn, I absolutely think that does help me, be able to hold safe space for these kids that I am coming into contact with because so much of mental health and how it presents is based on family systems and how you grew up and environment and even genetics. Not everything is purely based on circumstance. It's genetic as well. So, it took me until adulthood to learn that, I suffered from generalized anxiety disorder. And then after a couple toxic, traumatic relationships in adulthood, and I had good ones as well, but after a couple of bad ones, like PTSD as well.
Right, right. So, what did you do to learn how to name those things? What type of work have you done on yourself? And were you doing that work when you just mentioned that you were in traumatic relationships? Were you doing that work then, or did it kind of manifest more after those relationships?
Yeah, so it didn't manifest for me. until after those traumatic relationships that I hit in adulthood. As a teen, my parents did want to get me into therapy, and because they were noticing at school that I was depressed or down, which very much fit the situation of my life. So I was kind of forced to go to therapy for a little bit. And I remember I just didn't like it. I didn't want to talk to a stranger. It was a male. I didn't know him. Like, why would I want to talk about how I feel with somebody I don't know? Like, I
Right.
wasn't even talking about it with family at that point because that wasn't part of the generational makeup of our family. So after I was married and divorced to a man, and that was in 2008, and that relationship was very normal, very what you would consider, you go to college, you get married, white picket fence house, great guy, but I was still learning who I was, and it just so happened that I was into women more than I was into men. So after I divorced, I did have relationships with women, and that's where it got traumatic. Um, and I realized that I should start addressing things that I was dealing with for myself because I wanted to be healthy. So I got into therapy after the end of a relationship that was very much emotionally abusive, on the
Okay.
verge of physically abusive. She would get in my face and threaten.
Okay.
Um, and I would just literally cry and shut down and not know how to name my feelings, not know how to stand up for myself or express myself. Um,
And
so
being an introvert, you kind of just went right back inside. That was
I went right back to childhood and used
right.
my coping mechanisms of like withdrawing and just, trying to dissociate basically.
Right.
Um, So when that relationship ended, it was an awful ending. I was not living here in Illinois at the time where I grew up. I was in New Mexico with my ex, and it ended very abruptly. And I had to make a decision just to move back here to Illinois because I did not have a job at the time. I was in between jobs because I felt I was in a safe relationship to quit my job and pursue something else
Right.
after I had worked for the same company for 15 years. So um, it was chaotic. I moved back to Illinois and, I knew there was something wrong with me. I knew I was down to the point that I was experiencing symptoms of PTSD from all the yelling that she had done with me. What had clued me into that is I remember being in my grandma's house and being in the kitchen, and my dad was there, and they had a dog at the time. And like the dog did something, and my dad yelled at the dog, and that startled me. And my dad's a big guy. He's not a yeller. He didn't yell at us as kids, but just the fact that he raised his voice at the dog gave me a physical reaction.
Right.
So it was
And
then that I knew that I needed help, and so I sought medication for anxiety. I went to the emergency room and asked and felt really stupid because they treated me like I was just asking for drugs. Mhm. And
that's
then I decided
that's
to feel
a
stupid.
response I've heard from many people when you go and ask for help initially and they don't know everything. They think that, you're just doing it because you want drugs. That's
Yeah,
not
no, and
what
you
you
have to sit there and be vulnerable with somebody you don't know and, like, basically be in the point of tears that you're suffering. And it's like you don't wanna give somebody your personal life history that you just met like that when you're asking for
Exactly.
help, and it's another reason that led me to this line of work because I get how difficult that can be when you're in, an emergency room, hospital bed, and you're struggling and you're having to talk to a stranger about how you feel.
Right. Right. It's difficult. And, I commend you for having the sight to take yourself there and get the help.
Yeah.
And now using these skills to help others and realizing that some people are still at that point in their life that they are still very vulnerable. They don't know how to express it. Um, what other I know you said you sought the medication first, so I'm assuming that they did help you at that point, and then you were able to get into some other type of
Yeah.
therapy and some sort of coping.
Yeah, so I did my they did give me some medication. They at least gave me a little bit of Xanax is what they gave me, and that was exactly what I needed. Did I know that I needed it at the time? No, but did I know that Xanax helps people with anxiety? Yes, so that's what I
Right.
asked for. So they gave me enough, and it was working for me and helping. And once I was able to calm my nervous system down a little bit, is when I decided to like research therapists in the area. I've always been drawn to psychology. I read for fun and knowledge. I don't read fiction. I read nonfiction because I like to learn.
I'm the
Um,
same way.
yeah, so, like, me reading all of Brené Brown's books during that time was something else that helped me. So I found a therapist, and the first one I found didn't resonate for me. She wanted to do something called EMDR therapy, which
Yes,
I even had to Google at the time, and I now understand it works for a lot of people,
it
but
does, but it can be traumatic to some.
it can be traumatic to some, and I felt like I was at the point in my life because I'm 45 now, so in 2015 when I sought help, I was still an adult, and I felt at that point I had processed a lot of stuff and grieved a lot of stuff that had happened with my mom just naturally, and I didn't feel the need to, engage in that type of therapy that wanted to go all the way back and process those things in that way. Have I processed more things about my mom since? Yes, absolutely, but at the time, that wasn't for me. What I ended up finding was a psychiatric nurse practitioner in the area that also did therapy, um, and I was also enrolled in grad school at the time for clinical counseling, which I have not finished my master's degree in that, but I was working and doing that, and I started seeing this nurse practitioner, and she was kind of a catalyst for me, kind of a life changer because she could prescribe medication, try different things, and also do therapy. Um, and she appreciated the fact that I was wanting to go into the field. And so like that gave us a whole nother lens.
Right.
So I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder by her and PTSD and subclinical for depression, which
Oh,
still resonates for me. I don't think I've ever felt like I've struggled with symptoms of depression like others do so much as anxiety and PTSD. So she was able to get me on medication for a while. I also had a general doctor who is also a nurse practitioner. I recommend nurse practitioners. I'm going to say it live here. They're amazing. Um, who is also able to help with my medication. So I was on medication for anxiety for a while, and the counseling definitely helped me as well.
and was that, you said you were also in graduate school and like you said, you like to learn for fun, which I think
Mhm.
everybody should learn for fun personally. But those two components and being in therapy, were you able to get yourself off the medication? If that's too personal, you don't have to answer it. And,
Yeah.
then now you're going through things with the individuals that are in crisis that you're helping. Is that giving you a better lens to help them?
Yes. So the first part of your question, I have been on and off of medication since then. My nurse practitioner, I was paying out of pocket for her because she did not accept insurance at the time. She was new. So that was like a limited thing for me. Once I did get insurance and was working full time, I did transition to more therapy with a different agency, and I've been with them now and I've had 2 different therapists through this agency. I've been with them pre-pandemic, so it's been a while, but, like, I did even take a break in therapy for a while just because it wasn't affordable, but I always knew that I wanted to come back to it, and of course, there was another relationship that happened that prompted that further, throughout the pandemic. So, my therapist and I were really digging into, like, me personally and how I show up in relationships, and what I was tolerating was not good, and now I know better, so I do better, And I'm not on medication for depression or anxiety right now. I do have Xanax that I can use as needed. Sometimes it helps me calm down after being on work, after being on call, when my brain is still in work mode and turning and trying to problem solve and safety plan with people. And I do have a prescription for something that's used off label for social anxiety, which is something I believe I struggle with as well. It's called propanol, and it's used for high blood pressure. So it kind of like it acts quickly and calms down the physical symptoms you experience of anxiety, like your nervous system, the tightness in your chest, like that sense of dread. And I
Okay.
can use that when needed. So both things that I'm on now, I can use as needed, and I don't need to take them every day. Some of the antidepressants that I've taken before, Prozac worked well for a while, Zoloft worked well for a while, but then, it either starts to numb you out, which I don't like the feeling of feeling numbed out,
Right.
or to the point where you need to up the dosage, and that was something I didn't wanna do as
Right.
well. I didn't wanna keep, like, upping the dosage of medication. I wanted to keep upping the times I would be at therapy and doing the work there. So,
Exactly.
um I've been in therapy consistently now so we're in 2023. Since 2019. There was, like, a couple breaks between 2015 and 2019, but since 2019 and even 2020 during the pandemic, I don't think I would have recognized I was in another abusive relationship had I not been in therapy, and
Yeah,
at
that
one.
was gonna be my question is you said you were in it, so now that has helped you see what your past patterns were?
Oh, I see the patterns, yes. Yes,
Okay.
and I wouldn't have seen the pattern if I wasn't in therapy. I don't think I would. I'm a very self-aware person, and I pride myself on that, but there are certain things that you cannot be self-aware about that are subconscious that don't come out unless you have another set of eyes and ears helping you. So it wasn't until I was, like, describing all these things that were happening in my long distance relationship during the pandemic where I couldn't even get to see my ex because she lived in Canada and the borders were literally closed. Um, I was still being emotionally abused. And at one point, my therapist said to me, and I don't remember the day, but I remember exactly what happened. She's like, "AJ, have you heard of the cycle of abuse?" And in my mind, I was like, "Yeah, but, like, that's not me." And then we went over it together.
And you realize it is.
It was the
It
cycle of abuse. It just came in the form of, emotional abuse, which I don't think a lot of people, um, are aware about because we hear so much about physical abuse because that's something you can actually see with your eyes. Emotional abuse is not necessarily something you can see with your eyes.
right, and it can be very subtle, and like you said,
Mhm.
you needed somebody else, when you explain the situation, somebody else can kinda point things out to you because after a while, when you're in a situation with someone who is abusive emotionally and mentally to you, you don't see it. It that becomes normal to you. So
Yep.
the ups and the downs, the gaslighting, and then the love bombing, you that's normal.
All of
So
all of it felt normal to me. I didn't know what gaslighting was until, like, some of that was being pointed out in therapy, and then at that point, I could go back to a couple of my other previous relationships, which there were only 2 significant ones before then, and all 3 of them were with women, and it was then that I could say, "Yeah, I was being gaslit and manipulated, and I did not know it." And
so
love
now
bomb.
right. So now you're aware of why you were drawn to people like that and can kind of self-correct if someone is around you, I'm assuming.
Yes, I learned about attachment styles and family systems and how we can show up as having an anxious attachment, which typically means you self sacrifice and are willing to do pretty much anything for the person that you love. And typically, you attract the avoidant attachment style, which is like, I love you, I hate you, get away from me. And it becomes this cycle of basically it's two sides of the same coin. Everybody's looking for love and connection and validation, but it presents in totally different ways. It's like that push-pull roller coaster cycle where if there's a disagreement, the anxious person wants to talk about it right then and there and get closer and work it out. And the avoidant person is like, wait, nope, hold on. I'm going to put on my running shoes and run away because this is uncomfortable for
But
me.
I'm going to blame you for it in the meantime.
Mm-hmm. And each has its things that need to be worked out and worked on to get to a place of secure attachment style, which is possible, but I don't think there's ever such a thing as fully healed. We're all going to have something to heal from for the rest of our lives. And to me, I always thought, well, they would talk about secure attachment, and in my mind it's like sometimes people can take that and the lens is like perfection. For me, I know it's not about perfection. It's about progress and healthy boundaries and healthy relationships. And there's always going to be part of me that has that anxious side because of the way my childhood was and my family system. And it's nobody's fault. It's just something that has to be dealt with and coped with.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that you said that, because I've said that, I go live, as you know, on several platforms, and I talk about a lot of self-care, and I have mentioned multiple times that I think everyone should have some sort of therapy, and that healing is a journey. Then I don't see an end to it, because just everyday life, you can experience traumas. So
Yeah.
there's something to say about working through all of that with someone who is outside of the situation, and that can maybe shine some light on things that you may not necessarily be aware of, so that you can continue to go forward in a much healthier way. So I love that you were talking about the therapy and that you're still in it. And I'm hoping that you're in a situation now, if you are in a relationship, that it is a much healthier one, and that you've set your boundaries so that people can't come at you like that.
Yeah, I have somebody in my life that I love very much. And we were just talking the other night. We both have our own struggles in terms of mental health. And um, we were talking the other night and joking about how our demons get along, they play with each other. And I told her, like, even if we haven't defined, titled the relationship, we've been doing this for a year. There's been ups and downs. We've managed to um, repair, communicate and repair. And
Wonderful.
that has not been something that I have experienced in a relationship of any kind in adult life, um, let alone one that is more intimate. And there's definitely feelings of love in. With friends, it's easier. With somebody that you are attracted to and have feelings for, it does get more
It
complicated. But
complicates it a little.
I was just telling her, yeah, literally last night, like we've had our things, we've had disagreements, we've had ups and downs, but it's all been like real life adult shit that we've gone through. And we're able to come back together and communicate in a healthy way, even if it's not that way in the moment. Like we're human.
Exactly. You
Perfection's not the goal.
you have you can take a little breather, walk away, and come back, as you said, as an adult in a healthy space, to have proper communication to resolve any of the issues that might be around, without
Mhm.
the love bombing, without the gaslighting, without all of the negative around it. And that you're both at a point that you recognize that you've had triggers and what they are now, so that you can talk about them openly and honestly.
Yeah, we are both, and I give her a lot of credit too. We are both at a point in our adulthood. She's 43, I'm 45. We've lived a lot of life. We've experienced a lot of things. Um, and the level of self-awareness that I think you get in your 40s, you're not prepared for, but it's also amazing. You learn to take things and set boundaries and not put up with the things that you did when you were younger.
Right, because
Or
you don't have to.
you don't have
You
to.
can make your own mind up and your own decisions.
You can literally do what you want and be yourself, and that's the beauty of being in your 40s. Like, you hit this point where it's like, I'm gonna do what I want. I'm gonna set my boundaries. I'm gonna live life according to how I want, not how the world says I should or anybody else. And we both have a level of self-awareness and insight that makes our relationship strong.
Well, and like you said, now that you're of this age, you've set these boundaries, you attract people into your life that have that same self-awareness. So it becomes easier. And you've set your boundaries, but you also know that you're not going to backslide just because somebody has come into your life because they've done the same types of work. You're on the same vibrational level, so to speak.
Yeah, we're on the same spiritual vibe, and I will say that I understand why a lot of people don't seek out therapy and counseling because it's hard.
It is hard.
It's hard. It's hard to go inward, take a look at yourself, and realize that you are the reason for some of your problems as well. It's much easier to outsource our problems and not hold ourselves accountable, but for me personally, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Right. I love that. Thank you. That is beautiful. I think more people should come to that awareness. And I'm glad that you voiced that because I do think the struggle is very difficult for people to get into therapy just for that reason. It's when you've come through traumatic, you know, events, you don't want to realize that you had some part in it, that you have to take some sort of accountability. It's
Yeah.
not always everybody else's fault. So
Yeah, it's super hard to do that, but, um, it's much more, I don't know the right word, it makes your life a lot easier when you look at yourself and you realize your own things you need to work on, in the way you show up in relationships, because when at the end of the day, we only have control over ourselves and how we react and how we relate, so, um that alone, and the one thing that my therapist had told me that I will always remember because it's, like, my biggest coping skill when I do get anxiety and activated is, um, feelings aren't facts.
yep.
Sometimes you have to look at the facts of the situation, especially when you're feeling a lot, to get yourself out of your nervous system being dysregulated, your overthinking being out of control.
Right.
Stop, take a pause, look at the facts of the situation, and you start to learn that feelings are not facts. They're transient. They're meant to be experienced that way. The good
Exactly.
and the bad.
Right. Well, I'm gonna stop asking you questions. I'm gonna thank you profusely for being here. I'm gonna ask if perhaps you would like to come back on again because I kind of feel like there's a lot more that we can touch on, and especially with the work that you're doing, and it's very impactful on people, and I think more people need to hear about it. So if you would come on again, I would be honored.
I would love to come on again. I feel like we could talk for hours about this stuff and not even touch into my workspace, but I definitely have a lot of stories from that as well.
Right. Well, then I'm going to leave it for you will be on multiple times because I definitely enjoy talking to you and I'm learning from you as well. So this has been wonderful.
Yes,
So
thank you
thank
so
you.
much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So thank you everybody for being here with us. I appreciate it. And again, we will see AJ in the future. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day. So cheers, everybody.